In 20 minutes, FA Cup action with Grimsby versus Aston Villa and Cardiff against Manchester City. First, at 9:45, the news on BBC One with Peter Sissons.
4 men are arrested in Bosnia over the abduction and murder of a British aid worker. Outraged but undeterred, the United Nations pledges that the relief operation will go on. Limiting the damage inflicted by that Lamont interview, senior Tories back the Prime Minister. And Arafat and Perez lift some of the gloom over Middle East peace. Both speak of a deal soon. Good evening. The Muslim authorities in Bosnia are reported to have detained 4 men over the murder of a UN aid worker from Britain. Paul Goodall was abducted and then shot dead near the town of Zenica. UN relief convoys have been brought to a standstill because British drivers, who make up a third of the total, have stopped work as a mark of respect. Mr. Goodall's widow has called for the other British drivers to be brought home, but UN officials say the drivers want to continue and are not going to throw in the towel.
This morning, the police promised the UN's relief agency they would do their utmost to find the killers. They mobilized reservists and brought in experts from Sarajevo. But conditions of lawlessness prevail all around, hardly the ideal setting for a murder hunt. However, the pressure for results has yielded something. That something was a statement by Azim Fazlic, in charge of the government's investigation, that several people had been detained and some physical evidence found. No formal charges, but there is an impression of progress which may make it easier for the relief effort to resume, and that had stopped completely. In this weather, the last thing that the aid operation needed was another glitch, and this is more than a glitch. Only military traffic was moving today. 2 Danish convoys due in from Banja Luka stayed away. The central warehouse at Zenica was empty. The ODA, the British agency to which the dead and injured belonged, is grounded at least until Monday, though its drivers locally have voted to get back on the road.
They definitely have stated that they believe that they ought to continue what we are doing here, and that we should not be intimidated by the actions of these murderers.
The main relief agency sees the attack as an attempt to intimidate all its workers. The question now is, will they be intimidated?
Oh, no. We are fighters. We are not going to throw in the towel. I think we're pretty much aware that we may be in the 15th round, and we may at the moment be losing on points, but we're still in the game.
Some food was still being distributed here from supplies brought in before the crime and the standstill. A continued cut-off, according to one official, would be catastrophic. Martin Bell, BBC News, Zenica, Bosnia.
Here, cabinet ministers have tonight been defending the Prime Minister after the former Chancellor, Norman Lamont, was reported to have described him as weak and hopeless. The Home Secretary, Michael Howard, said John Major would lead the country for many years to come. In an interview in the Times Weekend magazine, Mr. Lamont was quoted as describing the government's Back to Basics campaign as nauseating. The former Chancellor says he's been misrepresented, but his denials only further diverted attention from a keynote speech by Mr. Major. Our political correspondent John Sopel reports.
Downing Street had thought this morning's headlines would be Major fight back, Major on the offensive, not Major is hopeless. The Times is standing by its story. No more than a collection of invented quotations and muddled recollections is how Norman Lamont sees it, although he's not been at his West London home all day to clarify precisely what he did mean. Inevitably, though, the alleged comments have been seized upon by a grateful opposition.
Well, I think it's very revealing what top Tories think and say about each other, so that in addition to quite deep divisions and policies, there's rampant personal dislike. If they think so little of each other, why should we think anything about any of them?
John Major's speech last night had been billed as an important policy statement, a relaunch of Back to Basics, but he acknowledged it hasn't been easy to break free from the relentless flow of adverse comment.
We are not paid to be popular, and just right now, Mr. President, that's probably rather a good thing.
And almost prophetically, his speech was overshadowed, much to the exasperation of John Major and cabinet colleagues.
Well, Norman Lamont has denied those quotations, and I think we need to get away. We've been suffocated by the froth of phony stories. We need to get to the real substance of politics, which is what the Prime Minister's just done in this excellent speech in Leeds.
But loyal Conservatives are beginning to worry about the long-term damage that's being done to both the party and the Prime Minister.
I think an article like this will undermine the government and will certainly undermine the leader, whose position is always the most precarious. He's at the top.
I think the first thing we have to do is to get away from moronic sloganising and talk to people like grown-ups. We've run out of ideas, and by God, it shows in the language.
Irrespective of whether Norman Lamont made these disparaging remarks or not, there are many other Conservative MPs in private giving vent to similar feelings. But John Major was again telling friends this week that with the economic revival, so there'll be an upturn in both his own and the party's fortunes. But it is beginning to be a test of Conservative nerves. John Sopel, BBC News, Westminster.
The SDLP leader, John Hume, has called on the IRA to suspend acts of violence while it decides on its response to the Downing Street peace initiative. The Sinn Féin leader, Gerry Adams, has said he's prepared to go the extra mile to see an end to violence. He's waiting for the US State Department to decide whether to grant him a visa for a visit to New York next week. This report from our Ireland correspondent, Dennis Murray.
NBC News. This is Today.
Gerry Adams made the comments in an American television news report. There they heard his voice. Here, because of government restrictions, his words are spoken by an actor.
I want to see an end to violence. I don't advocate violence. My position on the Downing Street Declaration is clear also. It's described as a first step, and we are totally committed to a peace settlement. So if it's a first step, we wish to embrace it.
Sinn Féin is holding a series of meetings to decide its response to the Downing Street Declaration and whether it can support an end to IRA violence. Mr. Adams met the US Consul General in Belfast yesterday. The American government says his responses on those issues are crucial to whether he gets a visa or not.
Gerry Adams met with our Consul General in Belfast today to discuss his views of violence and of the joint partnership agreement reached between the British and the Irish. We will review his responses on those questions and make a decision in light of that.
In any event, the leader of the main nationalist party in Northern Ireland has called on the IRA to end its campaign while it's considering its response.
I think that it would underline their commitment to a peace process if they were to announce that they were suspending, I'm talking about the IRA now, their activities, until they had made their decision.
Republicans haven't given that answer yet, and when Gerry Adams says if the declaration is a first step, they'd wish to embrace it, then that's still not accepting it. There's no doubting the more positive tone, but it's the present Sinn Féin position in new language. Dennis Murray, BBC News, Belfast.
Scotland Yard says a firebomb has gone off at a store in central London. The device, which caused little damage, was found in a haberdashery shop in Oxford Street. A second device discovered under towels at the same store has been made safe. It's the latest in a series of firebomb attacks on Oxford Street stores this week. Israel's Foreign Minister Shimon Peres and the PLO leader Yasser Arafat say they're hopeful about reaching a final peace settlement. Meeting in Switzerland, Mr. Arafat said it would be very soon. Mr. Peres said fairly soon.
Mr. Arafat's arrival by helicopter in a Swiss mountain valley underlined the oddity of holding Middle East peace talks in the middle of a ski resort. Both sides have been playing down expectations that they're close to signing a deal. And today, the PLO chairman was sticking to his usual formula.
What do you hope to achieve in Davos? Are you going to agree?
We hope so.
Davos is host to an annual meeting of 1,000 world leaders and power brokers. But the attendance of the Palestinians and the Israeli Foreign Minister, Mr. Peres, has this year added spice to its ruminations on the state of the world economy. Mr. Peres has brought a full team for his negotiations with Mr. Arafat.
We shall try very hard to reach an agreement. Whether we shall be successful or not remains to be seen.
This ski resort setting is the latest unusual location in the series of meetings between Israel and the PLO. But the longer they go on, the more complex the talks become. To avoid future arguments, they're now trying to spell out in some detail the precise arrangements on the divisive issues, such as borders and policing. The Israelis and Palestinians gathered this evening with public smiles and handshakes that would have been impossible when this series of negotiations began. time is building a better relationship. The two men joked, with Mr. Perez pretending to interview Mr. Arafat.
When are you going to sign?
Yesterday. We hope to be very soon.
Tomorrow they share a public platform to discuss the Middle East peace prospects, but they're talking through the night to see if they can improve them first. Brian Hanrahan, BBC News, Davos.
More than 10,000 people have demonstrated in Cheltenham to demand the restoration of union rights at the GCHQ Intelligence Centre. The protest marks the 10th anniversary of the ban on unions there. The government justified the original decision on the grounds that union loyalties could undermine national security. Today, the Labour leader, John Smith, again promised a Labour government would reverse the decision. Police in Hampshire say a 43-year-old accountant whose body was found on a beach yesterday was probably murdered for his car. Grant Price disappeared last Saturday while out with his son in Gosport. Police believe he was abducted when he returned alone to his car to fetch his son's spectacles. His body was found with multiple stab wounds. Police in Perthshire have arrested a man in connection with the murder of a Midlands businessman earlier this week. Terry Maidens was shot dead in front of his wife and 4-year-old son at their home in Nuneaton on Wednesday night. Now, with news of a shock in the FA Cup and the rest of the sport, here's Rob Bonnet.
Second Division Cardiff City produced a major surprise in today's fourth round. They beat Manchester City of the FA Premiership 1-0. Ironically, the day had started well for City supporters with the news that Francis Lee has finally won the battle for control of the club. Lee is expected to become chairman next Saturday.
Encouraged by their largest crowd for a decade, Cardiff's enthusiasm ensured a regular supply of goal chances. But it took more than an hour for their pressure to pay off, as Nathan Blake, 22 on Thursday, avoided 2 challenges before curling a shot past Coton in the City goal. The Premiership side thought they'd equalise straight away, but Keith Curle's shot was disallowed because he was offside. Then, 10 minutes from the end, Curle had another chance after City were awarded a penalty when Rocastle was fouled. Cardiff's protests were in vain, but they needn't have worried as Curle's kick was saved by Mark Grew. There was still one more chance for Manchester in injury time, but Grew again made an agile save from Curle. Cardiff were through to the 5th round for the first time in 17 years.
We've never had a good run since I've been here in the FA Cup, so it's nice to get a home draw against a Premier League club and score the winner.
For Manchester City, lost among Cardiff's jubilant supporters was now only a fight against relegation. Duncan Jones, BBC News.
Elsewhere in the Cup, other Premiership sides survived after conceding early goals. A Peter Beardsley penalty brought Newcastle back into their match against Luton. David Wetherall's equaliser completed a draw for Leeds at Oxford, who'd been leading 2-0. And Steve Jones scored for West Ham 3 minutes after Notts County had taken the lead. The games at non-league Kidderminster, Charlton, Chelsea and Grimsby will be featured on Match of the Day after this programme. If you don't want to know the results, look away now. There was also a Coca-Cola Cup quarter-final replay today, won by Tranmere Rovers, who beat Nottingham Forest 2-0. Their opening goal came midway through the first half from Pat Nevin. And although Forest pressed for their equaliser during the second half, it was Tranmere who scored again just a minute from time through Tony Thomas. Tranmere play Aston Villa in the semi-finals. Viewers in Scotland tonight can see the cup tie between Motherwell and Celtic. Elsewhere, Mark Hateley was amongst the scorers as the cup holders Rangers beat First Division Dumbarton. Rangers will now be at home to Alloa or Ross County, while Hibernian's reward for beating Clyde today is an Edinburgh derby with Hearts, who won at Partick. The Premiership leaders Warrington are through to the 5th round of Rugby League Silk Cut Challenge Cup. They beat Halifax by 22 points to 18 in a thrilling match this afternoon.
After a nervous start by both teams, Halifax took an early lead when Graham Hallis completed a typically fine move.
Superb piece of rugby.
Though Warrington dominated the possession, Halifax continued to look dangerous, and another good move was rewarded with a second try, this time scored by John Bentley. But the second half belonged to Warrington, or rather Jonathan Davis, the league's top point scorer this season. The first of 2 outstanding tries put the league leaders into a winning position for the first time in the match, and his second virtually assured Warrington their victory and place in the 5th round. But Halifax never gave up. A late try provided some hope, but Warrington's resistance was just too strong. Peter Jones, BBC News.
Mark Ramprakash has strengthened his claim to a place in the England Test team by scoring a century in the latest tour match against St Kitts and Nevis in the West Indies. Ramprakash scored 136 as England declared their first innings at 308 for 6. And in South Africa, Alan Wells hit 130 for England A on the second day of their match against South Africa A. He helped his side to 269 for 7 in reply to South Africa's 357 all out. Steffi Graf has maintained her domination of women's tennis with a crushing victory in the final of the Australian Open in Melbourne. In the most one-sided Australian final for more than 30 years, Graf swept aside the number 2 seed Arantxa Sanchez Vicario 6-love, 6-2 in less than an hour. In the absence of the injured Monica Seles, Graf has now won 4 successive Grand Slam titles. Richard Dunwoody has become only the 4th jump jockey to ride 1,000 winners in Britain. The achievement came with a 6-length victory on Flaky Dove this afternoon in the Cleve Hurdle at Cheltenham, the scene over 10 years ago of his first win. And finally, the world of skiing has been shocked today by the death in competition of the former world champion, the Austrian Ulrike Meyer. She was taking part in a World Cup downhill event at Garmisch-Partenkirchen in Germany, when on the lower part of the course she lost control and broke her neck. After first aid on the mountain, she was flown to a local hospital, but she died there 3 hours later. And racing at Garmisch has been abandoned for the weekend as a mark of respect. Peter.
And the main news again. The Muslim authorities in Bosnia are reported to have detained 4 men over the murder of a UN aid worker from Britain. That's all from the newsroom tonight. Good night.
On Breakfast with Frost tomorrow at 8:15 on BBC One, Sir David's guest will be Shadow Home Secretary Tony Blair. And joining John Humphreys on the record at 1 o'clock, the Home Secretary Michael Howard.
Good evening. The weather is changing once again. Colder air is pushing into the north, and that cold air is going to be arriving pretty quickly across northern Scotland tonight, where the winds will be gusting to over 70 miles an hour and there'll be some drifting snow. Now, the colder weather is pushing in behind this band of cloud, and you can see we've got plenty of showers showing up on our weather radar across Northern Ireland and Scotland already, and through tonight those showers will be turning to sleet and to snow. And later on we'll find our rain arriving across England and Wales, although the mild air will hang on a little while longer across the southern part of the country. Now, tomorrow it is going to be quite a cloudy start in the south, but eventually the brighter weather will work its way down from the north, and still plenty of those wintry showers to come across Northern Ireland and across Scotland. And as that brighter weather works its way southwards, well, it'll turn colder. Now let's take a look at the winds, because they will moderate a touch over northern parts of the British Isles during tomorrow, but they will still be very strong in the far north of Scotland, touching 45 miles an hour at times, and in the south it's going to turn out to be a breezy day once that brighter weather pushes in. On Monday it'll turn milder again from the west, with some cloud and rain up over northwestern parts of the British Isles. That's it. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.